It started as an ordinary evening in the crowded supermarket, the kind where the soft hum of refrigerators mixes with beeping scanners and murmurs of tired shoppers, and nobody quite notices anyone else's quiet battles. She stood in line clutching a small basket, not filled with luxuries but with basics: milk, bread, rice, a cheap box of cereal her little boy had shyly chosen because it had a cartoon astronaut on the front. Her eyes were the kind that smiled at people automatically even when her heart didn't have the energy, and her clothes carried the story of too many washes and too few replacements. As she approached the cashier, she rehearsed polite words in her mind, hoping everything would go smoothly, hoping the numbers in her account would stretch just enough this time, promising herself she would eat less if it meant her child could eat more. The cashier scanned items casually, unaware of the storm behind her calm face. The total flashed on the screen like a verdict. She swallowed, slid her worn-out card forward, and whispered a silent prayer the machine would grant her mercy today, just once more. The machine took its time, like it always does when suspense is cruelest, and for a brief moment she allowed herself the fragile luxury of believing it would be approved. She pictured going home, making dinner, watching her son nibble on cereal and laugh at silly jokes, pretending life was normal. Then the cashier's neutral expression shifted, an uncomfortable half-smile of apology forming before the words even arrived, and reality came crashing down like cold water. "I'm sorry, ma'am, your card declined," the cashier said softly, yet in her ears it sounded like it was shouted through a megaphone that every person in line could hear. Heat rushed to her face, embarrassment and panic tangled together. She fumbled with her bag, searching desperately for coins, for any forgotten note, convincing herself there had to be something. People behind her shifted restlessly, some sympathetic, some annoyed, others pretending not to notice while very clearly noticing. She wanted to vanish, to melt into the floor tiles, to be spared this public exposure of private struggle. Her child tugged at her sleeve and whispered, "Mom, it's okay," which somehow broke her heart even more. She tried again because hope, even when bruised, often refuses to die the first time. She asked the cashier to swipe it once more, forcing a trembling smile because pride demands dignity even in defeat. Again, the machine blinked, processing, thinking, deciding her fate in seconds. Declined. The word flashed again, harsher this time, as if mocking her. She apologized to the cashier in a voice so small it almost didn't exist, saying she would put some items back. Inside, she felt the familiar ache of failure, the silent guilt parents feel when love is abundant but money is not. She began removing items, first the cereal box because mothers always sacrifice their own joy before their children's, then she hesitated, then removed the milk too. She tried to do it calmly, but her hands shook, betraying the storm she hid so carefully. She whispered another apology to the clerk, to the people waiting, to life itself for not being able to hold everything together today. Every move felt like thousands of invisible eyes weighed on her shoulders. Then, just as the moment seemed to collapse entirely around her, a calm yet firm voice broke through the anxious silence behind her. "Try mine." The words floated like unexpected light into a dark room. She froze, thinking for a second that she must have imagined it, because kindness that direct felt almost unrealistic in a world that often keeps to itself. Slowly she turned, and there stood a man, not dressed extravagantly, not announcing heroism, simply standing there with steady eyes that held no judgment, only warmth. He extended his card casually, as if offering help in this way was as normal as holding a door open. There was nothing theatrical about him, that was what made it more powerful. The cashier looked from the woman to the man, eyebrows raised in question, and he nodded simply, saying, "Please, include everything. Don't remove a thing." The woman opened her mouth to protest, instinct telling her she didn't deserve this, but the words tangled in her throat. Her first reaction was not relief, surprisingly, it was resistance born from years of being told to manage alone. "I can't let you do that," she murmured, voice heavy with apology, embarrassment, and disbelief all at once. He smiled, not the pitying kind that wounds, but a gentle, respectful one that said he saw her, not her circumstance. "It's okay," he replied, "everyone needs someone sometimes." Simple words, yet they carried the weight of permission to not be perfect, to accept help without shame. Around them, the restlessness of the line faded into quiet curiosity. Even the cashier softened, shoulders relaxing as she took the man's card. The transaction went through without hesitation, as if the machine itself respected the kindness. The little boy looked up at the man like he was witnessing magic, and perhaps he was. The mother felt tears threaten, blinking rapidly to hold them back, because this time they weren't just fueled by struggle, they were fueled by unexpected grace. The receipt printed in a long stream, an ordinary piece of paper recording something extraordinary. She tried again to express her refusal, but it turned into gratitude instead. Why? She asked softly, not because she doubted his intentions, but because it had been so long since life had surprised her with goodness rather than hardship. He shrugged lightly, the way people do when something is obvious to them but astonishing to others. Because once, someone did it for me, he said, eyes briefly clouding with an old memory he didn't elaborate on. It was enough. She understood then that kindness travels like a ripple. Someone had once given him hope and he refused to let that story end with him. She clutched the grocery bag like it was a treasure chest, because in truth it was more than food, it was relief, dignity restored, a reminder that she wasn't invisible. She offered to pay him back someday, rambling promises she knew might be difficult to keep, but he shook his head gently. Just pass it on when you can, he said, turning the moment into a bridge to the future rather than a debt chain to her. That sentence lodged itself in her heart. Pass it on, not today, not under pressure, but someday when life opened a door for her to stand where he stood now. She nodded slowly, committing silently to that future even if she didn't know how it would come. Her son tugged again on her sleeve, whispering shyly, "Thank you, sir," and the man bent slightly to the child's level and said, "Take care of your mom. She's a superhero." The boy smiled wide, and for the first time that day, she laughed, a small but real laugh that felt like breathing after being underwater too long. They walked out of the store together for a few steps before their paths divided, the fluorescent lights of the supermarket fading into evening air. She turned one last time to wave, afraid she might never see him again and wanting to memorize his kindness. He waved back casually, as if he had merely participated in a normal human duty rather than changed someone's entire day, perhaps her entire outlook. As she carried the bags, they suddenly felt lighter despite their weight, because now they were filled not only with food but with hope. She replayed the moment in her head, disbelief slowly giving way to deep appreciation. For so long, she had fought battles quietly, thinking she had to survive completely alone. Tonight, she learned that sometimes strength is not only in standing alone but also in being able to receive help with grace. Back home, in their small apartment with flickering lights and warm hearts, she unpacked groceries carefully like precious gifts. Her son danced around the kitchen holding the cereal box triumphantly as if he had won a prize. She cooked dinner with unusual joy, pouring gratitude into every simple dish. While he ate, she watched him, realizing that today's lesson would shape him too. He had watched kindness happen firsthand, had seen compassion not as a story in a book but as something living and breathing in a grocery line. She knew that children remember moments more than speeches. One day, when he grew older and stronger, he too might say, "Try mine," and mean more than just a card. That thought alone made the earlier embarrassment feel small compared to the larger story blooming from it. Later that night, when her son slept and the world quieted, she finally allowed the tears she had been holding back to fall without restraint. Not tears of humiliation this time, but of release, relief, and awe. She sat by the window, city lights blinking like distant stars, and whispered a prayer not just for herself but for the stranger who had stepped into her life for a few minutes and left an imprint that would last for years. She didn't know his name, his story, or where he was at that moment, but she knew something with complete certainty: kindness had power. It rearranged the heaviness inside her, turned despair into determination, reminded her she was not abandoned by the world as she had sometimes believed. The next morning felt different, not because her problems magically disappeared, they hadn't, but because her heart carried a new strength. She woke up earlier than usual, determined to continue trying, not because she had no choice, but because now she believed her effort mattered. She made breakfast, packed lunch, and left for work with a quiet smile hugging her lips. Even when small obstacles appeared, she found herself handling them with unexpected calm. Every time worry tried to take over, she remembered the voice behind her saying, "Try mine," and it echoed like reassurance: "You are worth helping, you are worth care, you are worth goodness." Days turned into weeks, and though she never saw the man again, he was present in 100 small choices she began to make. She started helping neighbors where she could, sharing a meal, watching a child for a few hours, offering a listening ear. These were not grand gestures, but they were sincere ones. She understood now that kindness isn't measured by price but by heart. Sometimes it is a card at a register, other times it is simply staying when someone needs company. Each act felt like honoring the stranger's gift, continuing the ripple instead of letting it end with her. Then, one late afternoon, she found herself in a strangely familiar scene. A young man at a counter, wallet nearly empty, frustration and embarrassment mixing in his eyes as the cashier apologized for his declined payment. Without hesitation, before doubt or insecurity could interrupt, she stepped forward and heard herself say with steady, confident warmth, "Try mine." The words felt powerful, leaving her lips, like completing a circle. The young man looked at her with the same stunned disbelief she had worn before. She smiled encouragingly, recognizing the storm behind his silence. And in that moment, she realized she was no longer just the woman who had been helped, she was now the woman who helped. As she walked home afterward, there was no audience, no applause, just a deep peace filling the spaces once crowded with fear. She didn't do it to repay a debt, but to honor a legacy of compassion handed gently from one stranger to another. Life, she realized, is full of unseen exchanges like these, people lifting one another quietly so the world keeps moving forward with a little more light each time. She thought back to that evening at the supermarket, the beeping machines, the whispered apologies, the trembling hands, then to the calm voice that changed everything. One person's choice had rewritten the script of that night and many nights after. And so the story lives on, not in headlines or loud declarations, but in ordinary places like checkout lines and small kitchens and tired hearts that refuse to stop hoping. "I'm sorry, ma'am, your card declined," may have been how the moment began, but it was never how it ended. It ended, and keeps ending, in the echo of that simple, powerful kindness, "Try mine." Because sometimes the greatest wealth is not in bank accounts, but in hearts willing to share, in strangers willing to stand beside you when the world feels heavy. And somewhere, right now, perhaps another voice is preparing to say those same words, continuing a chain of compassion that began long before us and will outlive us, carried forward each time someone chooses generosity over indifference.